Counterrevolution and Revolt by Herbert Marcuse quotes. Counterrevolution and Revolt by Herbert Marcuse is an incisive exploration of the tensions between revolutionary forces and the mechanisms of counterrevolution, particularly within the context of advanced capitalist societies. Marcuse examines the consolidation of power through a counter-revolutionary effort to suppress potential challenges to capitalist dominance, which he links to forms of state control, repression, and even military interventions globally. By analyzing the structural dynamics of monopoly capitalism, Marcuse sheds light on the role of the counterculture and radical movements as possible drivers for transformative change, envisioning a society where genuine freedom and creativity can flourish beyond the confines of capitalist exploitation. Quote 1. The Western world has reached a new stage of development. Now, the defense of the capitalist system requires the organization of counter-revolution at home and abroad. The author begins by pointing out the transformation of the capitalist system, which has become reliant on counter-revolutionary tactics to maintain its power. These efforts are marked by a global spread of violence and suppression, whether through direct confrontation or by other means such as economic control. The quote highlights the extreme measures used by capitalist powers to retain dominance, such as brutal military actions and systemic oppression. The use of terms like counter-revolution underscores the preventive efforts to curb any possibility of revolutionary movements challenging the capitalist order. Quote 2. The counter-revolution is largely preventive and, in the Western world, altogether preventive. In this context, the author argues that unlike historical counter-revolutions which responded to actual revolutionary uprisings, the contemporary capitalist counter-revolution is proactive and preemptive. Capitalism in the Western world does not face an immediate revolutionary threat, but acts preemptively out of fear of potential uprisings. This fear has shaped the actions of capitalist states, from democratic governments to police states, consolidating power to prevent even the possibility of change that would endanger the capitalist system. Quote 3. The fall of the capitalist superpower is likely to precipitate the collapse of the military dictatorships in the Third World, which depend entirely on this superpower. This quote conveys the interconnectedness between global power structures. The author suggests that military dictatorships in the Third World are sustained through their alliance with and dependence on capitalist superpowers. Should these superpowers collapse, the dependent regimes would also fall, potentially allowing for the rise of more radical and liberation-oriented governments. This analysis emphasizes the fragility of these regimes and their inability to stand independently without support from powerful capitalist nations. Quote 4. No longer condemned to compulsive aggressiveness and repression in the struggle for existence, individuals would be able to create a technical and natural environment which would no longer perpetuate violence, ugliness, ignorance, and brutality. This excerpt envisions a future where the destructive dynamics of capitalism are replaced with a society that values human well-being and harmonious existence. Freed from the constraints of aggressive competition and the need for survival under capitalism, people could create environments that foster positive qualities like beauty and knowledge. It contrasts the potential of socialism as a humane and ethical system with the inherently violent and oppressive nature of capitalism. Quote 5. The socialist universe is also a moral and aesthetic universe. Dialectical materialism contains idealism as an element of theory and practice. Here, the author explains the unique quality of socialism, where moral and aesthetic values are integrated into its ideological foundation. Unlike capitalism, which subordinates ethical considerations to profit, socialism aims for a holistic transformation that includes improving the quality of life and emphasizing human development beyond mere material gains. It presents socialism as a morally superior and aesthetically fulfilling alternative to the capitalist system. Quote 6. Capitalism reorganizes itself to meet the threat of a revolution, which would be the most radical of all historical revolutions. This statement emphasizes the perceived threat of a potential socialist revolution that would be global and transformative in nature, unlike any revolution that preceded it. The author suggests that this would be the first truly world historical revolution, fundamentally challenging the structures of global capitalism. The reorganization of capitalism mentioned here highlights how deeply ingrained the fear of revolutionary change is, prompting continuous adaptation by capitalist forces to prevent such a transformative event. Quote 7. The highest stage of capitalist development corresponds, in the advanced capitalist countries, to a low of revolutionary potential. In this quote, the author is presenting the paradox that despite the advancement of capitalism, there is little revolutionary energy within these developed countries. The success of capitalism in achieving a high level of material comfort has led to widespread complacency and resistance to radical change. The abundance produced by advanced capitalist societies serves as a means of co-opting the working class and weakening their revolutionary potential. Quote 8. Capital now produces, for the majority of the population in the metropoles, not so much material privation as steered satisfaction of material needs. The author notes that capitalism in advanced economies does not primarily thrive by denying material needs, but by controlling their satisfaction. This steered satisfaction implies that while material comfort is provided, it is controlled in such a way that it pacifies the population, preventing them from questioning the system. The emphasis is on how capitalism creates dependencies by manipulating needs, keeping people content, but fundamentally disconnected from the pursuit of real autonomy or revolutionary change. Quote 9. Capitalism cannot satisfy the needs which it creates. In this quote, the author suggests that capitalism inherently produces needs that it is unable to fulfill, leading to a continuous state of dissatisfaction. The rising standard of living and the constant creation of new consumer needs only serve to enforce the cycle of consumption, but these needs increasingly become transcendent, meaning they extend beyond what capitalism can adequately supply. This paradox fuels a discontent that may eventually contribute to the system's downfall, as the very structure of capitalism fails to keep pace with the desires it fosters. Quote 10. The revolution involves a radical transformation of the needs and aspirations themselves, cultural as well as material. The author argues that the goal of a socialist revolution is not merely to provide greater satisfaction within the existing capitalist framework, but to fundamentally change the nature of human needs and aspirations. This transformation includes altering the nature of work, leisure, and relationships, aiming for a rupture with the current consumer-driven lifestyle. The focus shifts from material acquisition to moral, aesthetic, and intellectual fulfillment, emphasizing new relationships with nature, other individuals, and society at large. Quote 11. Freedom is understood as rooted in the fulfillment of these needs, which are sensuous, ethical, and rational in one. Here, freedom is redefined in terms of fulfilling not just basic material needs, but also ethical, aesthetic, and emotional needs. This broader concept of freedom involves creating new relationships among individuals and between humanity and nature, highlighting the importance of moral and aesthetic experiences. Freedom becomes intertwined with the ability to live authentically and harmoniously, a departure from the alienation often associated with capitalist society. Quote 12. The potential mass base for social change may well become the mass base for fascism. We may well be the first people to go fascist by the democratic vote. The author warns of the danger that the discontent within capitalist societies could be co-opted by fascist movements. Instead of fostering a revolutionary transformation towards socialism, this dissatisfaction could be redirected towards supporting authoritarian regimes. The reference to going fascist by the democratic vote underscores the fragility of democratic institutions when the fears and frustrations of the masses are manipulated, suggesting that the very mechanisms of democracy could be used to bring about anti-democratic outcomes. Quote 13. The monopoly capitalist management of the population, the inflated economy, the defense policy of kill and overkill, the training for genocide, the normalization of war crimes, the brutal treatment of the vast prison population have built up a frightening reservoir of violence in everyday life. This quote criticizes the militaristic and oppressive aspects of capitalist society, describing how state policies and corporate interests contribute to a pervasive culture of violence. The author argues that these practices, ranging from economic exploitation to militarization and the normalization of inhumane acts, embed a level of brutality within society. This reservoir of violence affects not only marginalized communities, but also the general population, creating a volatile social climate that can be harnessed for authoritarian purposes. Quote 14. At the most advanced stage of capitalism, when work for the necessities is technically reducible to a minimum, the universal need for surplus work would mark the rupture, the qualitative leap. The author envisions a point in capitalist development where technological progress reduces the need for human labor to meet basic needs, leading to a potential transformation. This qualitative leap would allow individuals to engage in work not because it is necessary for survival, but because it fulfills a deeper, more universal need. The shift signifies a fundamental break from the exploitative nature of labor under capitalism, highlighting a possibility for human creativity and freedom that goes beyond the current system's constraints. Quote 15. Breaking the oppressive rule of material production now shifts the focus from the material to the intellectual sectors of production, from alienated labor to creative work. The author is pointing out that with the evolution of capitalism, the opportunity to shift focus from sheer material production to intellectual and creative work emerges. The liberation from oppressive and alienated labor is envisioned as a process where human creativity takes precedence over the demands of commodity production. This transformation would imply that work is no longer dehumanizing or solely driven by market values, but instead oriented towards fulfilling human needs. By emphasizing intellectual production, society would begin to produce for a liberated existence, rather than just adhering to the economic laws of capitalism. This shift in focus opens possibilities for a cultural revolution, where intellectual and creative endeavors play a central role in reshaping society's values and aspirations. Quote 16. The consumer society raises the specter not only of an economic, but also of a cultural revolution, a new civilization where culture is no longer a privileged branch in the social division of labor, but instead a culture which shapes society in its entirety. The author suggests that the consumer society has within it the seeds of a much broader transformation, one that is both economic and cultural. In this vision, culture ceases to be a separate or elite sphere, accessible only to a few, and instead becomes something that permeates every aspect of society. This cultural revolution would result in a society where all activities, including material production, are influenced by cultural and aesthetic values. Such a transformation challenges the existing capitalist framework by aiming to integrate culture into the entirety of social life, thereby fundamentally changing what people value and aspire to. Quote 17. The radical movement from the people remains obscured, as do the very real possibilities of establishing a free society. The author is pointing out the gap between the radical movement and the general populace. The movement's values and actions often seem alien or threatening to the majority, because socialist and Marxist ideas have not found fertile ground among the broader working population. This disconnect obscures the potential of establishing a genuinely free society, since the differences between the existing capitalist structure and the envisioned liberated society are not clearly understood by the masses. The radical actions taken by movements like the New Left are viewed with suspicion, making the idea of liberation seem like a threat rather than an opportunity for transformation. Quote 18. The unity of theory and practice is never immediate. The given social reality, not yet mastered by the forces of change, demands the adaptation of strategy to the objective conditions. The author emphasizes the importance of adapting theory to fit the existing conditions rather than assuming an immediate or direct unity between revolutionary ideas and practical action. The current social reality, with all its complexities, requires a careful and strategic approach rather than a simplistic application of revolutionary concepts. Marxian theory must evolve in response to changes in capitalism in order to remain relevant and capable of guiding effective action. The notion that theory and practice should always align directly is unrealistic. Instead, practice must be adapted to fit the objective circumstances of the time in order to create meaningful change. Quote 19. The juncture between the two forces is a precondition for change. Trade union consciousness must become political consciousness, socialist consciousness. The author argues that for any substantial social transformation to take place, it is essential that trade union consciousness evolves into political and socialist consciousness. The consciousness that comes from focusing on immediate workplace grievances must grow into a broader understanding of the need for systemic change. The working class must see beyond short-term improvements in working conditions to understand the necessity of overthrowing the capitalist mode of production altogether. This transformation is critical for bridging the gap between labor movements and the broader revolutionary goals of the New Left, ultimately paving the way for a united effort toward socialism. Quote 20. The technical and economic integration of the system is so dense that its disruption at one key place can easily lead to a serious dysfunctioning of the whole. The author points out a key vulnerability of modern capitalist systems: their intricate interconnectedness. The dense integration of technical and economic processes means that disruptions at a single, strategically important point can have far-reaching effects, potentially causing the entire system to malfunction. This provides a potential opening for radical change, as grassroots movements could leverage localized disruptions to create significant systemic pressure. By targeting critical nodes in production, distribution, education, or transportation, a decentralized and spontaneous revolution becomes possible, thereby offering an alternative to a traditional centralized revolutionary strategy. Quote 21. Revolutionary workers' control would presuppose the primacy of the political over the economic and technical factors. The author argues that for workers' control to truly challenge the capitalist system, it must go beyond merely managing their economic activities. A radical political consciousness among workers is essential for their control to have revolutionary potential. Without this political shift, any form of workers' management remains part of the existing system, simply serving as a rationalization rather than a disruption. Political radicalization would enable a decentralized and debureaucratized form of control, transforming isolated instances of workers' control into nests of post-capitalist production, reminiscent of how urban centers of bourgeois power existed within feudal society. This would mark a significant shift from economic integration within capitalism to the formation of socialist units. Quote 22. The councils will be organs of revolution only to the degree to which they represent the people in revolt. The author emphasizes that councils, such as those formed during revolutionary movements, do not inherently drive social change simply by their existence. Instead, they must embody the revolutionary consciousness of the people, serving as instruments of their will to challenge the established order. These councils are not automatically created through elections in workplaces or neighborhoods. Their emergence requires a radical shift in consciousness and a break from the values upheld by the capitalist establishment. Therefore, for councils to be effective in revolution, they must genuinely represent the desire of the people to transform their social, economic, and political reality. Quote 23. Direct democracy, the subjection of all delegation of authority to effective control from below, is an essential demand of leftist strategy. The author points out that the demand for direct democracy, where authority is subject to constant oversight by the people, is a crucial aspect of leftist revolutionary strategy. However, this demand is also inherently risky because it assumes that the majority of participants are progressive. For example, in the student movement, effective student control over university administration presupposes a more progressive student body than the faculty or administration. Despite the risk that such changes could backfire if the majority is conservative, the author argues that the potential for reform outweighs the risks, and leftist strategy should continue pushing for direct participation and oversight. Quote 24. Workers' control may lead to an alleviation of the burden of work, to its more effective organization, to the development of workers' initiative. But at the same time, these changes may well benefit the capitalist enterprise. The author acknowledges the dual nature of workers' control in the workplace. On one hand, it can improve working conditions, reduce the burden of labor, and foster a sense of empowerment among workers. On the other hand, these improvements can also enhance the efficiency and profitability of capitalist enterprises, ultimately reinforcing the system rather than challenging it. Despite this ambivalence, the demand for workers' control remains central to radical strategy because, in the long term, it has the potential to disrupt the link between labor and capital, undermine the need for wasteful production, and free technology from its capitalist constraints. Quote 25. The ambivalence of the below also characterizes the leftist slogan, "Power to the people." The author explains the complex nature of the slogan, "Power to the people." In its ideal form, this slogan refers not to the current majority, who sustain bourgeois democracy through their participation, but rather to the marginalized minorities who are excluded from political and economic power. These are the people who do not vote, who are impoverished, incarcerated, or otherwise oppressed. The slogan implies a radical change in the needs and consciousness of the people, suggesting that those who ultimately have the power to liberate themselves would no longer be the same individuals who uphold the existing system today. This change highlights the necessity of transforming both the structures of power and the people themselves. Quote 26. While it is true that the people must liberate themselves from their servitude, it is also true that they must first free themselves from what has been made of them in the society in which they live. The author argues that true liberation requires people to first emancipate themselves from the conditioning imposed on them by the capitalist system. This primary form of liberation cannot occur spontaneously because the values and goals of the established order are deeply embedded in people's consciousness. Self-liberation requires an element of external education and leadership to challenge these ingrained values. In a society where access to knowledge is unequal, the role of educators and leaders becomes crucial in helping people realize their full potential. All genuine education is political, and in a class society, political education requires leadership that translates spontaneous protest into organized, purposeful action aimed at transforming society. Quote 27. The distinction between self-indulgence and liberation, between clownery and irony, between criminal gangs and communes, can be made only by the militants themselves. The author stresses the importance of self-discipline within revolutionary movements, distinguishing between actions that serve true liberation and those that merely indulge in personal rebellion. The line between genuine revolutionary acts and self-indulgent behavior can only be drawn by the activists themselves, not by the courts or the authorities. While there is value in rejecting bourgeois norms, not all acts of defiance are revolutionary, especially in a society that commodifies obscenity and trivializes rebellion. True liberation requires a disciplined approach that embodies the ideals of a future free society, rather than merely reacting to the existing order in ways that may ultimately reinforce it. Quote 28. The radical transformation of nature becomes an integral part of the radical transformation of society. The author suggests that the process of societal change is inherently linked to the way humanity interacts with nature. Instead of treating nature as a mere resource to be exploited, a new form of sensibility is emerging that aims to change this relationship fundamentally. This shift involves recognizing nature not as something to dominate, but as an ally in the struggle against exploitation, one that must be liberated alongside human beings. By transforming both human and external nature, society can foster an environment that prioritizes freedom, creativity, and a deeper connection to the natural world. This transformation marks a significant departure from the exploitative practices that have defined the relationship between humans and nature under capitalism. Quote 29. Nature is a part of history, an object of history. Therefore, liberation of nature cannot mean returning to a pre-technological stage, but advancing to the use of the achievements of technological civilization for freeing man and nature from the destructive abuse of science and technology in the service of exploitation. The author argues that the liberation of nature should not be seen as a regression to a pre-industrial era. Instead, it should involve harnessing the positive achievements of technological progress to benefit both humanity and nature. The goal is to free both from the destructive consequences of technological misuse, which has primarily served the interests of capitalist exploitation. This approach envisions a future where technology is used not for control and profit, but for fostering a sustainable and harmonious relationship with nature. Thus, a liberated nature, which coexists with advanced technology, can help restore certain lost qualities of craftsmanship and genuine human creativity. Quote 30. Commercialized nature, polluted nature, militarized nature cut down the life environment of man, not only in an ecological, but also in a very existential sense. The author emphasizes that nature, as it currently exists under capitalist control, is not only polluted and commercialized, but has also become a tool for the oppression of humanity. The consequences of this exploitation go beyond environmental degradation. They have a profound impact on the human experience itself. The commercialization of nature limits the possibility of forming a genuine connection to the environment, blocking the transformative potential of such a relationship. The author's vision of liberation involves the recovery of the life-enhancing qualities of nature, qualities that capitalism has distorted or destroyed. By seeing nature as an active partner in the creation of a free society, humans can reconnect with their environment in a meaningful way. Quote 31. Domination of man through the domination of nature. The concrete link between the liberation of man and that of nature has become manifest today in the role which the ecology drive plays in the radical movement. The author draws a connection between the domination of nature and the domination of human beings, suggesting that the two forms of oppression are deeply intertwined. The struggle to liberate nature from exploitation is part of the broader struggle for human freedom. This link is evident in the ecological movement, which fights against the pollution and destruction caused by capitalism. The ecological crisis serves as a physical manifestation of the broader social crisis, where the violation of nature is inseparable from the exploitation of human beings. While the ecological movement can sometimes be co-opted to serve the interests of the establishment, the author argues that the fight against environmental degradation must continue, as it is crucial to the fight for human liberation. Quote 32. Without a change in this dimension, the old Adam would be reproduced in the new society, and the construction of a free society presupposes a break with the familiar experience of the world, with the mutilated sensibility. The author warns that without a profound transformation of human consciousness, the oppressive patterns of the old society will continue to exist in a new form. The creation of a truly free society requires breaking away from the established ways of perceiving and interacting with the world. Under capitalism, human sensibility has been shaped to conform to the system, making people resistant to the idea of true freedom. For a radical transformation to occur, a new nonconformist sensibility must emerge, one that challenges the established order and opens up new possibilities for human experience. This change in sensibility is essential to prevent the continuation of old habits and ideologies in a new social framework. Quote 33. Radical sensibility. The concept stresses the active, constitutive role of the senses in shaping reason. that is to say, in shaping the categories under which the world is ordered, experienced, changed. The author introduces the concept of radical sensibility to highlight the importance of the senses in shaping human perception and understanding of the world. Rather than being passive, the senses actively contribute to how individuals perceive, organize, and transform their reality. This means that social change requires a shift in how people experience the world at a fundamental level, involving not just abstract ideas, but also a deep sensory engagement with their environment. By reshaping human sensibility, individuals can break free from the constraints imposed by capitalist rationality and begin to imagine and create a new social order that aligns with their true needs and desires. Quote 34. Can the human appropriation of nature ever achieve the elimination of violence, cruelty, and brutality in the daily sacrifice of animal life for the physical reproduction of the human race? The author questions whether it is possible for humanity to fully eliminate the inherent violence involved in its interaction with nature, especially regarding the consumption of animal life. Despite humanity's efforts to transform its relationship with nature into one that is less exploitative, certain harsh realities, such as the need for food, suggest that complete elimination of violence may be an unrealistic goal. This tension reveals the limits of human control over nature, and the author calls for a balance between minimizing suffering and acknowledging the fundamental aspects of survival. Even in a liberated society, there must be a recognition of these inescapable aspects of existence and an ongoing effort to reduce unnecessary suffering imposed on the animal world, while acknowledging that some level of violence might remain inevitable. Quote 35. The senses are not only the basis for the epistemological constitution of reality, but also for its transformation, its subversion in the interest of liberation. The author emphasizes that human senses play a dual role. They not only perceive reality, but also have the potential to transform it. In an alienated society, the senses are conditioned to accept the world as it is, defined by existing social structures. However, when liberated, the senses can discover new possibilities and forms that can lead to the transformation of society. This idea is central to the notion of freedom as a practical, sensuous experience, rather than an abstract concept. The emancipation of human sensibility, therefore, becomes key to achieving broader social change, as the senses can actively guide individuals in envisioning and creating a new, liberated reality. Quote 36. Freedom thus becomes a regulative concept of reason, guiding the practice of changing reality in accordance with its idea, i.e., its own potentialities, to make reality free for its truth. The author discusses freedom not as an abstract ideal, but as a guiding principle that helps shape practical action towards transforming society. In this sense, freedom is an ongoing, empirical process that involves uncovering and realizing the true potential of human beings and nature. It is through this practice that reality is transformed, not to achieve utopia, but to continually push towards a more liberated, peaceful, and joyful existence. The concept of permanent revolution is grounded in this understanding of freedom, which transcends the immediate conditions of society and nature in a process of ongoing struggle and improvement. Quote 37. The faculty of being receptive, passive, is a precondition of freedom. It is the ability to see things in their own right, to experience the joy enclosed in them, the erotic energy of nature, an energy which is there to be liberated. Nature, too, awaits the revolution. The author highlights the importance of receptivity, which is often overlooked in a society that prioritizes aggressive action and productivity. True freedom, according to the author, requires the ability to appreciate and experience the world without the need to dominate or exploit it. This involves recognizing and embracing the intrinsic qualities of nature, experiencing its beauty, and releasing the creative energy that lies within it. Such an attitude of receptivity contrasts sharply with the prevailing values of capitalist society, which see nature as something to be controlled and used. By developing this sense of receptivity, humanity can form a deeper, non-exploitative relationship with nature, one that is based on mutual respect and liberation. Quote 38. It is the woman who embodies, in a literal sense, the promise of peace, of joy, of the end of violence. The author suggests that women, through their historical and social roles, have come to symbolize qualities that counteract the aggression inherent in patriarchal society. Tenderness, receptivity, and sensuousness are qualities that have been associated with women, and these traits, although shaped by oppressive social structures, represent a potential force for liberation. The author calls for the feminization of society as a way to transcend the aggressive and domineering tendencies that have shaped history. This transformation is not about reinforcing traditional gender roles, but about promoting the ascent of eros, life-affirming energy, over aggression, thus weakening the primary aggressiveness that has defined patriarchal culture. By embracing these traditionally feminine qualities, both men and women can contribute to building a society based on peace, joy, and mutual respect. Quote 39. Cultural revolution. The phrase, "in the West," first suggests that ideological developments are ahead of developments at the base of society. Cultural revolution, but not, yet, political and economic revolution. The author points out that cultural change often precedes political and economic transformation. In the West, the cultural revolution manifests in art, literature, music, and societal norms, suggesting a radical shift in values and experiences. However, these cultural changes have not yet been accompanied by substantial political or economic changes, leaving the foundational social structures intact. This disconnection implies that the cultural revolution is attempting to reshape consciousness and values without directly challenging the underlying political and economic systems that support the established order. The emphasis on the arts as a vehicle for cultural revolution highlights the potential of cultural transformation to lead to more comprehensive systemic change, although it has yet to reach that point. Quote 40. A new language, if it is to be political, cannot possibly be invented. It will necessarily depend on the subverting use of traditional material. The author emphasizes that creating a new form of political communication cannot be achieved through the simple invention of new language. Instead, this language must evolve from subverting and repurposing existing language and symbols. Traditional language and imagery have long been used as tools of domination and indoctrination, shaping individuals' consciousness to align with the established order. To effectively challenge this, the language of the oppressed, whether found in art or folk traditions, must be transformed into a means of resistance. The author suggests that true political language must emerge through reinterpreting existing forms in ways that undermine the power structures they once served. Quote 41. The search is for art forms which express the experience of the body and the soul, not as vehicles of labor power and resignation, but as vehicles of liberation. The author describes the effort within the cultural revolution to find new art forms that express human experience in a liberated way. These forms should reflect the body and soul not as mere instruments of productivity, but as avenues for freedom. This approach aims to break away from the utilitarian and exploitative relationship that capitalism imposes on human beings, where every aspect of life is reduced to labor and efficiency. Instead, the goal is to create a sensuous culture that allows for a radical transformation of human experience, liberating individuals from the demands of productivity and opening up possibilities for joy and creativity. Quote 42. Today, the ruling class has neither a culture of its own, nor does it practice the bourgeois culture it has inherited. The author asserts that the ruling class of today no longer possesses a distinct cultural identity. The classical bourgeois culture, with its specific set of values and practices, is no longer relevant to or practiced by the ruling elites of advanced capitalist societies. This disintegration of bourgeois culture is driven not by revolutionary movements, but by the inherent dynamics of capitalism itself. The cultural forms that once served to uphold the bourgeoisie are now incompatible with the requirements of monopoly capitalism which has led to their decline. This suggests that the traditional cultural frameworks that once provided meaning and cohesion to society are being eroded by the very forces of capitalism they helped create. Quote 43. The higher culture of the bourgeois period was an elitist culture, available and even meaningful only to a privileged minority. But this character it shares with all culture since antiquity. The author acknowledges that the higher culture of the bourgeois era was an exclusive culture, accessible only to a small, privileged segment of society. This elitist nature is not unique to the bourgeois period, but has been a feature of culture throughout history. However, this does not negate the value or truth of such culture. Despite its exclusivity, the higher culture of the bourgeois era, like all significant cultural epochs, expressed universal human experiences and aspirations. This suggests that even though cultural forms may have emerged within specific social classes, their content often transcends those origins, speaking to broader human truths and aspirations. Quote 44. Classicism is the intellectual counterpart of political tyranny. It was so in the ancient world and in the medieval empires. It was renewed to express the dictatorships of the Renaissance and has ever since been the official creed of capitalism. The author suggests that classical art forms, with their emphasis on order, symmetry, and harmony, have always been aligned with oppressive political structures. Classicism, in its aesthetic representation, reinforces the values of control, authority, and stasis that underpin political tyranny. From the ancient empires to Renaissance dictatorships and into modern capitalism, the ideals of classicism have been used to uphold and justify the power of ruling elites. These aesthetic norms repress the instincts that drive change and growth, making classicism an imposed ideal rather than a reflection of liberated human creativity. By aligning with the official creed of capitalism, classicism becomes a tool of cultural control, maintaining the status quo and limiting the possibility of social transformation. Quote 45. At stake is the affirmative character of bourgeois culture, by virtue of which art serves to beautify and justify the established order. The author discusses how bourgeois culture uses art to provide an affirmative vision of the existing social order. This affirmative character is where art serves not as a critique, but as a means to legitimize the injustices and inequalities inherent in bourgeois society. Art celebrates universal humanity, elevates the soul, and exalts inner freedom, even while material deprivation and social oppression persist. However, this affirmation has a dialectical element. Within every work of art lies a tension between what is and what could be. In its attempt to offer beauty and solace, art inevitably evokes images of an alternative reality, one that challenges the limitations of the current system. Thus, while art may appear to beautify and justify the existing order, it also contains within it the seeds of its own negation, hinting at possibilities beyond the established reality. Quote 46. To the degree to which the latter prevails over the former, to that degree the opposition is displaced to the cultural and subcultural realm, to find there the images and tones which may break through the established universe of discourse and preserve the future. The author argues that as the counter-revolutionary forces increasingly suppress direct political change, the opposition shifts to the cultural and subcultural domains. These cultural spaces become arenas for preserving and expressing alternative visions of society, even when political action is stifled. Through art, music, literature, and other cultural forms, these movements challenge the dominant discourse and keep the hope for a different future alive. This shift reflects the historical conditions in which cultural resistance takes on a more prominent role when the political field is dominated by forces seeking to maintain the status quo. The cultural realm thus becomes a refuge for revolutionary potential, preserving the visions of change that cannot yet be realized politically. Quote 47. In the aesthetic form are this tension and the critical, negating, transcending qualities of bourgeois art, its anti-bourgeois qualities. The author highlights the dual nature of bourgeois art. While it emerges within the bourgeois framework, art also possesses qualities that go beyond mere affirmation of bourgeois values. These qualities, critical, negating, and transcending, make art inherently anti-bourgeois, as it often challenges the very conditions of its existence. The aesthetic form embodies a tension between the affirmation of the existing reality and the possibility of something beyond it. This tension allows art to critique and question the established order, making it a site of both reflection and rebellion. The challenge for the cultural revolution is to retain these anti-bourgeois elements of art while transforming them into tools for broader social change. Quote 48. Art can express its radical potential only as art, in its own language and image, which invalidate the ordinary language, the prose du monde. The author asserts that art's radical potential lies in its ability to use its unique language and imagery to transcend everyday reality. Art does not simply represent the world, it reimagines and reinterprets it in ways that challenge conventional understanding. The prose du monde, or the ordinary language of the world, is limited by its ties to the existing social order, whereas art operates in a different register. It uses symbols, metaphors, and forms that create new meanings, offering glimpses of an alternative reality. By doing so, art can point toward possibilities for liberation that remain invisible within the ordinary discourse. This inherent tension between art's own medium and the reality it depicts makes it a powerful tool for critique and transformation, but only when it remains true to its artistic form and does not become subordinated to direct political action. Quote 49. Art and revolution are united in changing the world, liberation. But in its practice, art does not abandon its own exigencies and does not quit its own dimension. It remains non-operational. The author emphasizes the complex relationship between art and revolution, noting that while both are driven by the desire to change the world, they operate in different realms. Art and revolution share a common goal, liberation, but the methods and dimensions in which they act are distinct. Art does not directly intervene in political practice or become part of the machinery of revolution. Instead, it retains its unique form and language. This non-operational character of art means that it remains focused on creating meaning and evoking emotions through its own aesthetic form, rather than becoming a functional tool of political change. Art expresses its radical potential through its aesthetic dimension, preserving its autonomy even when aligned with revolutionary ideals. Quote 50. Permanent aesthetic subversion. This is the way of art. The author suggests that art's true revolutionary power lies in its ability to constantly challenge and subvert the norms of the existing order. Unlike direct political action, which aims to transform society through concrete measures, art works through the imagination, continuously undermining accepted meanings and creating new possibilities. This subversion is not temporary or situational. It is a permanent aspect of the aesthetic experience, aimed at exposing the contradictions and injustices of the world. By reimagining the existing reality, art keeps alive the potential for transformation and acts as an ongoing force of resistance against conformity and repression. This quality allows art to be inherently revolutionary, even if its effects are not immediately visible in the political realm. Quote 51. The aesthetic form, in which alone the radical force of art becomes communicable. The author argues that the power of art to convey radical ideas lies within its aesthetic form. It is through the unique composition of colors, sounds, shapes, and symbols that art communicates its message, challenging the familiar ways of seeing and understanding the world. The aesthetic form makes the otherwise abstract or repressed ideas visible and perceptible, enabling people to experience them in a sensuous and transformative way. Without this form, the radical essence of art would lose its communicability and become indistinguishable from the mundane discourse of the established social order. Thus, maintaining the integrity of the aesthetic form is crucial for art's ability to carry and express its revolutionary potential. Quote 52. There must be some way to reflect his profound faith in the betterment of the world in everything that he tried to evoke, some way to make it appear somehow in the light he caused to fall on the horizon or on a roebuck's belly. The author highlights the idea that true revolutionary art does not necessarily need explicit political content to convey its radical message. Instead, it can evoke a vision of a better world through subtle and seemingly ordinary images. This approach reflects a profound belief in the possibility of positive change, one that can be suggested even in the simple way light falls upon a landscape or an object. The transformative power of art, therefore, lies not only in what is depicted, but in how it is depicted, the mood, the atmosphere, and the emotional resonance of the artwork. Through these elements, art can convey a vision of hope and transformation that transcends direct political representation, inviting viewers to perceive and imagine a different, better reality. Quote 53. The abolition of the aesthetic form, the notion that art could become a component part of revolutionary and pre-revolutionary praxis until under fully developed socialism, it would be adequately translated into reality or absorbed by science. This notion is false and oppressive. It would mean the end of art. The author strongly critiques the idea that art should be subsumed entirely into political practice or scientific rationality as part of the revolutionary process. Such an approach would strip art of its essential qualities, reducing it to mere propaganda or a functional tool. The aesthetic form, which embodies creativity, ambiguity, and freedom, would be abolished in favor of utility, effectively destroying what makes art unique and powerful. The attempt to eliminate the distinction between art and political practice denies the liberating potential of art, which lies in its ability to evoke experiences and visions beyond the immediate demands of the revolution. Art's value is in its ability to transcend the present reality, and forcing it into purely practical or political roles would stifle this imaginative and transformative potential, thereby ending its existence as true art. Quote 54. Art can and will draw its inspirations and its very form from the then prevailing revolutionary movement, for revolution is in the substance of art. The author argues that art and revolution share an intrinsic connection, with art drawing inspiration from the revolutionary spirit and events of its time. While art cannot directly bring about political change, it can embody the aspirations and struggles of revolutionary movements. The historical essence of art is filled with elements of alienation, reflecting the tensions within society and the possibility of liberation. Even as art evolves and adapts to different revolutionary contexts, it retains its core subversive qualities. This means that the revolutionary potential of art is not bound to any specific form or style. Instead, it constantly reinvents itself to remain relevant to contemporary social struggles. Quote 55. Art which has become capable of being political even in the, apparently, total absence of political content, where nothing remains but the poem. About what? The author highlights the ability of art to be deeply political, even when it lacks overt political themes or messages. Through the use of aesthetic form, art can evoke a sense of rebellion or liberation that transcends explicit political content. The example of Brecht's poetry illustrates how the simplest language can invoke images of a liberated world, suggesting that the transformative power of art lies in how it reimagines and represents ordinary experiences. This subtlety allows art to convey a political message without direct reference to political events, making it capable of resisting and challenging the established order through its inherent beauty and creativity. Quote 56. The aesthetic form will continue to change as the political practice succeeds, or fails, to build a better society. The author suggests that the evolution of art is closely linked to the progress or setbacks of political movements. As society changes, whether through successful revolutions or failures to achieve liberation, the aesthetic form of art will also adapt to reflect these shifts. At its most ideal, a universe shared by art and reality could emerge, where art retains its ability to transcend even as it becomes more closely aligned with a liberated society. The author acknowledges that the concept of the end of art is conceivable only in a dystopian scenario where humanity loses its ability to distinguish between good and evil, beauty and ugliness. Until then, art remains an essential part of the struggle against barbarism, dependent on the broader fight for social and political transformation. Quote 57. The fate of art remains linked to that of the revolution. In this sense, it is indeed an internal exigency of art which drives the artist to the streets, to fight for the Commune, for the Bolshevist Revolution, for the German Revolution of 1918, for the Chinese and Cuban revolutions, for all revolutions which have the historical chance of liberation. The author asserts that the fate of art is inherently tied to the fate of revolutionary movements, as both share a common goal of challenging the established order. This connection compels artists to participate actively in revolutionary struggles, recognizing that their work cannot remain isolated from the broader social context. However, when artists take to the streets and engage directly with political movements, they temporarily leave the realm of art and enter the domain of radical practice. While art itself may not be a direct tool of revolution, its influence and inspiration derive from the ongoing struggle for liberation, reinforcing the bond between creative expression and social change. Counterrevolution and Revolt by Herbert Marcuse ultimately presents a sobering yet hopeful call for revolutionary change amid the entrenched power of capitalist institutions. Marcuse emphasizes the importance of building a radical consciousness that can break free from the consumer-driven, repressive ideology perpetuated by the state. He challenges the reader to envision a future where revolutionary potential is actualized through collective awareness and action, pointing towards the creation of a society in which technology and human capability are harnessed not for domination, but for the liberation and enrichment of all individuals.
Curious to dive into the mind of Herbert Marcuse? With StudyLab Pro's book GPT, it's possible. Ask questions, explore themes, and discover the depths of Counterrevolution and Revolt in an entirely new way. Start your conversation now by clicking on our logo. And if you're hungry for more educational content, subscribe to our channel to keep discovering, learning, and growing. Want more than just videos? Click on our logo now to join us on our platform for multiple choice tests, in-depth content, and tools to help you ace your studies. Get started now.